discussions, make their own fatwas about stuff, and we're not involved in the conversation. And we also have the political context that I think is very useful and much needed right now at a time when Muslims are being directly targeted and impacted, not just by this administration, by administrations before this one, but in particular by an administration like this one. There has been never anyone in the movement that has asked me personally to give up anything about myself. And when they do, they are not my true ally. But I will fight for anyone who fights for our community, and everybody is created by Allah and deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, and that is how we Muslims have to show up in these United States of America.
Sheikh Dawood and Sheikh Tamara, each of you are educators and you have students. Zahra, to an extent, you're an educator as well because you do various training sessions, right? Youngsters are exposed to scholarly issues and activist issues online, at their masjid, at events that they might go to, right? Kids are exposed, youngsters are exposed to a variety of things now at a very young age. I'd be eager to know, when this issue comes up, when these lines between activism and what's scholarly and how you can, combine the two. And as Sheikh Yasha said earlier, the lines are ambiguous at times, right? So what are the youngsters saying? What's their approach? And if you want to keep it general, that's fine. Or if you want to speak about a specific issue like LGBT or abortion and so on, that's fine too. Tamara, you've got the microphone, so go ahead.
Well, your question is what are the young people saying, but my brain is still stuck between Sheikh Yasser and Sister Linda's talk when it suddenly occurred to me that no one is recognized, or maybe that somehow the definition of activism, it suddenly occurred to me that I may have discovered the reason I'm struggling with certain things in my own
Go ahead,
activism.
please.
Can I answer that?
Ignore my question.
Thanks.
Don't worry about it.
I just realized that political activism and the scholarly community, my struggles have been in activism within community. As a woman, just living and breathing and trying to go to the mosque, I have to be an activist. And and it's so hard to be listened to, and it's so hard to be heard, and it's so hard to bring issues of the mosque and the family, our Muslim families. I'm not talking about now the larger issues and political agendas. I'm talking very simply about what's happening in our communities. It has become so difficult to talk about these things, and it just occurred to me now, and I haven't thought it through yet, but that perhaps we're really struggling to identify activism as also being needed and existing within our communities. That our imams have to listen to us, and we have to listen to each other. And we have to recognize that when our mosques don't represent the prophetic mosque, and we're not welcoming people into the mosque, then all of these other issues are really, pardon me, but quite moot. Because if we're not growing our Muslim community, then all the fighting that Sister Linda and Sister Zahra and anybody else is doing for us in the political arena, who are they fighting for? We're going to disappear. All of the studying that we're doing and talking about research and fatwa and looking back at our history, what are we researching about? If 50 years from now, our mosques are going to be sold like the churches are going to be sold. And I'm telling you, if I'm a very religious person. I care a lot about my religion, a lot. I don't know that I can explain to you how much I care about it. I left the United States to go study Islam. I left everything to learn a language I never heard of. I ate rice for a whole bunch of years. I don't even like rice. All of these, I did so much because I really love this religion. And I love Muslims. I love this religion. And I can barely stand going to a mosque. Astaghfirullah azim, I hate to say that, but it's true. I have one experience after another. I've been kicked out of the mosque. I've had to pray Fajr and leave before the Jama'ah. I stand out in the freezing cold because as a woman I wasn't allowed to be in that space. Or they would let me, because I'm a guest, but the 25 women that were with me, no, sorry, you can't stand here. I've been sent to, just recently, I've been sent to back rooms, up rooms, basement rooms, bathrooms that seriously you can't even, there's nothing you can do in that bathroom. It's just, the situation is real and serious, and this dichotomy of that we're talking about, or the lack of dichotomy, however we want to define this, between scholar and activism, there's a problem, because we, inside of our communities, we're talking about, you asked the question, what are the youth saying? The youth I'm talking to, the young, I don't have, my interaction with really like teenagers is probably less than I'm hoping it will be in the future. But the youth, they're talking to me about all the issues, the political issues, and then they're telling me that they don't want to go to the mosque, that they don't want to A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Where is the community that is bringing them together? And where are we willing to talk to people who are standing up and in an activist, if you will, persona within the mosque and not being heard? And I'm one of them. And it's extraordinarily frustrating. And I'm sorry that I didn't answer your question, but that's just playing in my brain.
That's totally fine. That's totally fine. Thank you. By the way, you don't like rice? It's bad for you. Certain type of rice is very bad for you. So I think I'm sitting here again now, you're confused, like you talked about confusion, I'm completely confused. And I'm confused in that, because Yasser opened it up. When he walked in, he said to me, what side are you on? I know it was a joke, but there's truth in humor, right? But I say that because it's true. Because, like Linda said, right? I'm on the plains of Standing Rock in North Dakota. I'm in Selma with our students. I'm in Princeville, North Carolina, which is the first emancipated town in the United States of America, with our students with Islamic Relief, working on homes of people that were given land that was 26 feet below sea level, so every season their homes are flooded. But I'm also in the masjid teaching and doing these types of things that Linda said. So my question is, are we creating this false dichotomy that is, similar to Huntington's class of civilizations that then becomes some self-fulfilling prophecy? That's the question that I need to ask, that I'm asking myself, because here's the other thing that we talk about now. If you want to talk about scholars, then who are we talking about? Because if you want to talk about the masajid, mashallah, that Tamara is speaking about here, I don't want to go to those masajid either. Because the people that are running the masajid, the people that are given a position of leadership, have no idea of what it's like to live in this land. I'm sorry. I'm going to say it like it is. So when you talk about ideas, when you talk about things, now you want to put someone on the side of scholarship or put them on the side of activism. What I want to say is that I've seen over the years, in my opinion, is that I see it as, rather than running from scholarship, rather than engaging in choosing activism, it's almost like I'm seeing people being run from scholarship and embracing activism because of the space that they have that they're able to engage in. And I think that's something that Anissa is talking about here, of what she's saying. So if there is no room at the table, we made no positions at the boards, we didn't allow women into this space, then what do you think is going to happen? So now, whose fault is it? If we're going to create this dichotomy that is happening here. And then to say that, we have this, and then so it becomes incredibly problematic, because then people become entrenched. And when they become entrenched, we see the types of things. I'll tell you, I was very hurt. I was personally incredibly hurt. When this issue happened with Sheikh Hamza at RAS, and yes, I'll bring it up. I was very hurt. You know why? Because Sheikh Hamza made a statement. And you can take whatever you want on how that statement was made. But then everything came up about Zaytuna College needs to, and Zaytuna College needs to, and Zaytuna College needs to. And we were getting letters, and we were getting activists attacking and saying Zaytuna College needs to have issues around, issues about race, and we need to come in and do a seminar for you. I was like, well, wait a minute. You're talking about Imam Zayd? You're talking about Abdullah Ali, whose PhD is on the issue of the Negro in the intellectual of Black African scholars? You're talking about Dr. Hatton, you're talking about myself, and I just told you some of the things that we're involved in. So now it's like, we don't have, as I said, now we become entrenched into these camps, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, because now you have to pick a side. And now, this is what we're left with. So which side are you on? So I think it was very much providential that Yasser began that by asking, what side are you on?
And that's been the thing with me my whole life. You can't put a label on me. You can't put a label on me, right? Keep them guessing. And so that's something that I feel is really interesting in this time now, because now it's like, if I can't label you, now I don't know what to do with you. So again, this is the start of a conversation. I think it's incredible that this conversation is happening, and maybe what you're hearing right now is even us kind of dealing with and trying to work out and to sort out some of the things that I say. Am I going to agree with everything that Linda or Zahra or our sister or anybody on this panel or anybody here, Imam Zaidi or anybody, am I going to agree? No, I'm not. I'm my own person. And we don't have to agree with everything and everything. And I love all of them to that degree. But I think that that is something, again, that we have to be able to do what Linda is saying now, that we can no longer have this, paralleled engagement, right? And at best, it's paralleled. At best, it's parallel. So again, these are just some thoughts. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll get this going even a bit further.
Okay. Actually, on this issue of women in the masjid, I actually give a khutbah on this about including women in the masjid. I've had uncles yell at me while I'm giving the khutbah because of this issue. But then I always have about 10 times as many people yelling in favor, telling that other uncle to be quiet. This is an issue in our massages.
Wait, so can I add that?
Sure.
I'll add something. One of the things I tell young women, and that I know all of us are struggling with, is patient persistence. So on the issue of mosques and female inclusion, it's true that women have to show up as activists, right? But it's also the case, and I'll say this for anyone who's frustrated with anything, whether you're trying to get CARE to change, or you're trying to get ISNA to change, or you're trying to get any of us to do anything different. One of my best experiences at a masjid was when I walked in about 9 years ago. I had just started at CARE, and we were telling them, what do you do if the FBI visits you? It's a predominantly Yemeni masjid, so lots of FBI targeting. And I told my colleague who wasn't Muslim, dress conservatively. Like, this is a very conservative masjid. Make sure you've got the long pants and the hijab on. We don't usually ask you to do that because you're not from our faith, but do that. We walked in and they led us upstairs, and I was like, what's upstairs? And it was a closet, basically. But the problem was both of us spoke English, and the audience only spoke Arabic. And the audience was mostly men, because who gets visited by the FBI? The men, not the women, even though it's the women that represent the men who do this all the time. And then they gave us a two-way microphone. And we gave a Know Your Rights presentation from a two-way microphone.
Masjid, why? Because she has such bad experiences every time she goes. And you know what? When the women don't go, the kids don't go, right? Let's just be realistic here. When the women don't go, the kids don't go. So you're losing, an entire gender and the younger generation. So some of us can afford to wait, right? So what do you do then?
So I'll say something that I was thinking about sharing that Linda and I talked about as we tried to race through the bazaar before we made it here. And then I'll answer that question too. But one of the things was that I think a lot of times the problem with running activism and scholarship in parallel is that we assume that these scholars are not activists, or can't be activists, or don't care, or don't go to Standing Rock, or don't talk about racial justice. And then we assume that the activists are not religious. And so I was telling you that sometimes I feel like in this conversation, and I'll explain why I'm coming here, there's an assumption that the activists are driven by something else, that we're not driven by our faith in God. And so I tell people, my parents took me to the masjid every day of the week. If we were lucky, we got Saturdays off. But Sunday school, Quran class, we went to public school. We were a middle-income family, so we could not afford Islamic school, we could not afford ISNA, we could not afford Minna. Those were not things that we could do growing up. But what we could do was go to the masjid every day, and then Jummah. So 6 days a week. My brother studied that in Medina. I started to memorize the Quran at a very young age. Like, I know that I shouldn't be at an ISNA session past midnight because it would jeopardize going to Fajr. And I know that if I'm thinking about engaging in civil disobedience, I need to pray Dhuhr before I do that, right? Like, so that is what drives this. And the reason I start there is, one, to just say, like, hey, like, we are driven by religion also. Like, we are doing this because we want to answer to God and say that we did everything we could. And one of the ways I draw strength is to remember that the people who came before me fought for much longer. Right? Like, we think about the prophets, peace be upon them, who taught for decades to get a couple of hundred followers. I've been tweeting for 10 years and I have thousands of followers, right? Like, the struggles that we go through are minimal compared to the giants whose shoulders we stand on. And that doesn't mean that I went to that mosque every week knocking on their door saying, please let me in, I want to go to the front of the President's Prayer Hall. I go to dozens of mosques every year. I go to mosques across California and across the country. I support the creation of third spaces for people who don't feel comfortable in masajid. I support the development of online learning for people who can't find places that they can go to in person. So I'm saying be patient and persistent. Persistent means that you keep going, you keep trying, you keep pushing, and you're strategic in how you do it. If I had burned down the door that first time and said, I need to go to the front of the President's Prayer Hall to tell you this life-saving information, there wouldn't have been a second year or a third year or a fourth year, right? And so engaging over and over again is something that I feel comes from our tradition. Right? To say that we're not backing away, we're not giving up, we're not compromising either. So every time I went, I spoke to the men outside one-on-one to say, look, you need to talk to a lawyer, great, but like, hey, we're working on this, can you make it easier for us to come here? And at the same time, for people who said, I don't want to come, I said, that's okay, go where your spirituality thrives.
I think, so the interesting thing about my experience has been is that I get a lot of criticism from some scholars and a lot of criticism from the activists too. So I'm like right in the middle. And both of these groups of people, and I do sometimes think they can overlap, definitely for sure, but oftentimes they're not the same groups of people. So both of these groups of people had to have figured out how to come to terms with me, and some of the activists will say, why does Sister Linda get main stage? Sister Linda's progressive on some of these issues. Sister Linda has this particular approach, she gets main stage. And why does Sister Linda get this? And why does Sister Linda get it? You know why? Because I also understand how to work within the particular way in which the Muslim community works. I give deference to my uncles and aunties. I respect my elders. I respect scholarship. Even when I disagree with scholars, I don't go, you have never seen Sister Linda Sarsour go online and tear down any Muslim American or any Muslim American organization. This is not my way because it's not the Islamic way. If I have a problem with Islam will tell you, I pick up the phone and I call the people at Islam and tell them what the problem is that I have, right? If I have a problem with the position that a particular scholar has, I pick up the phone, I write an email, I go to their WhatsApp and I say, just want you to know, I think you were trying to do the right thing and saying the right thing, but here's what I think is. The scholar might actually be like, I still don't agree with you, Sister Linda, but there's an opportunity that I've been able to build deep, trusting relationships with folks. So if you think you're going to bully a scholar into your position, or if a scholar says something that maybe at that moment didn't come out the right way, or they could have used better words or whatever, bullying them online and going to public shaming is not the way to do it. I was there at the time when Sheikh comes in, and I actually moderated that panel that day. I'm not going to lie to you, like I was hurt by Sheikh Hamzeh, and only Allah knows what his intentions were and what he said, but I wasn't going to go online and be like, forget 35 years or 40 years of Sheikh Hamzah's scholarship because I happened to be really upset at a particular thing, or maybe two, there was actually 3 things that I didn't agree with him on that day, but that's not the point. The point is we all say things, and sometimes we're going to say things people don't agree with, or even sometimes we're going to make mistakes. So what I say to scholars and activists is, let's have a conversation. When somebody does something that you don't agree with, have a conversation. So I'm going to take you to the next thing about the tension. I have a particular approach. I can't help the feelings that I have. They are natural feelings. They are feelings that Allah gave me. Anger, sadness, love. These are not things that I created. So one time there was an imam, a sheikh, who's not at ISNA, who wrote a status on Facebook quoting my Facebook status, and then when he was confronted by other scholars, he's like, I wasn't talking about Sister Linda. But you quoted my Facebook status, so it is about me. So first of all, be honest. If you have something to say to me, say it to me directly. So here's what the criticism of this imam slash sheikh. And he was an Arab guy. I'm not going to give you any more details, and then you'll figure out who he is. But you probably may saw because he was public. It was on Facebook, so it wasn't even a private. I'm not even engaging in ghibah because he was making this a public thing. He said, beware. So he was cautioning people from me by saying, beware of people, beware of activists who are always enraged about injustice. What are you talking about? So his criticism of me was that I'm some angry Palestinian Muslim lady. And there's something un-Islamic about being angry and outraged about injustice. Sisters and brothers, this is what keeps young people that I organize with away from the masjid. If you sit in the masjid all day long while people are living, many of whom are folks in our community who are either watching their parents get deported or living in fear, watching black people get killed around them in their cities, unarmed by law enforcement, watching people die because they don't have access to healthcare, watching their friends die because they are overdosing on opioids or other types of drugs, and all this trauma and all this suffering in Palestine and Rohingya Muslims in Bangladesh and Chinese Muslims and everywhere where Muslims are. And you sit in the masjid talking to me about love. Don't hate those. Allah will judge those people on the last day, and Allah this, and this is not going to bring people closer to deen, right? Because you basically tell these people that there is no hope for all the suffering until the last day and until the afterlife. That's not our deen. Allah, we say, put your trust in Allah, but what? Tie your camels. So we don't, some imams and scholars forget the second part. Tawakkal ala Allah, don't worry, Allah has this, don't worry, put your trust in Allah and Allah's going to take care of it. No. Well, you know what, there has to be some action. Allah's not going to pay your rent. Allah's not going to go get the person out of detention. There has to be some things that we do as a community. So what I will say in the tensions that I've had with scholars, and especially those who have critiques of my particular approach and approach of us activists, is that different things move different people. And in my way that I've interpreted Islam, I do not hate anyone. I don't even hate Donald Trump. I hate what Donald Trump does. I hate the actions of our government. I hate the actions of white supremacists. I hate the actions of right-wing Zionists. That's how my deen teaches me. But my deen also teaches me that I should be angered by injustice and moved to speak out against it, to do something about it, or at least to recognize that it is an injustice in my heart. So when I'm out here impassioned, I'm not being un-Islamic. I am being impatient with injustice and watching Allah's creation suffer. There is nothing un-Islamic about this. So when people see scholars criticizing people like me, the young people got to make a choice. Do we go with the imam that says, put your trust in Allah, and being angry ain't the way to do this? Or does the young person who has so much rage in their body pick me, or pick Zahra, or pick another activist who's taking their rage and being able to help them put it in a productive way to feel empowered to stand up for themselves as Muslims? So that's where my tension is. My tension is that my approach is too aggressive, too combative for some scholars who sometimes may want to deem how I organize as un-Islamic. You don't have to agree with my approach, but you cannot claim that my approach to activism, being angered by injustice and choosing to do something about it based on my philosophy and my understanding of Islam, that it is a faith of social justice, and say that what I'm doing is un-Islamic. Because you know what you did? You just lost a whole bunch of young people to your congregation and to Islam and to your followers. And guess what's going to happen? That scholar is going to get asked by Allah. When that young person doesn't go back to the masjid, you're going to get asked why that young person didn't go to the masjid. Because something you said pushed those people away from the masjid. So that's the conversation that I want to have. Who gets to say what the right approach is? Who gets to say that love and compassion, right? Because my anger is driven by my love for my deen and my people. I love you enough to fight for you. So that because I'm angry about your suffering, that makes me un-Islamic. So this is actually true, and I could send screenshots for people on this panel to analyze. I'm going to already see them. But this is the kind of struggle that we have in the kind of online sphere.
Jazakallah. I have a question for you. So I was watching a video by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, as I regularly do. And he was talking about scholars from 1,000 years ago, 700 years ago. And there was this one scholar who was particularly harsh in his stances. And other scholars of that time were critical of that harsh scholar because they said that scholar had not traveled enough and he wasn't involved with the people enough. He wasn't exposed to people's problems. He wasn't exposed to different ways of life. So he got very comfortable, in just his little world. As the Dean of Academic Affairs at Al-Maghrib Institute, is there anything that you do to try to expose, would-be scholars to just a variety of issues, a variety of problems, so that people have a little more sympathy when they're implementing their Islam?
So, firstly, to answer your question, then I need to follow up for something that was said here.
Sure.
Obviously, this is a legitimate point that scholars need to understand their context, and you know the notion of text and context has been said by many people, and it's a valid point. And historically, we always find that there are scholars who are more aware of the pulse of the community. However, one needs to be careful here. Islam is not defined by the pulse of the community. It's very clear.
No.
Islam is defined by the Quran and Sunnah. The pulse of the community might fine-tune, but it's not going to completely reformulate. If the entire community is, let's say, drinking, it's not going to change the Islamic stance. What might change is the approach to the stance, but the stance itself is not going to change. So just because a scholar gives a fatwa that is quote-unquote politically correct doesn't mean it's the right one for the time. Sometimes the lenient fatwa is the correct one, sometimes the conservative fatwa is the correct one, sometimes it's a gray area. So that is a judgment call that scholars themselves have to do. Now I want to say one point here though. I think we're kind of sort of talking past one another here, because I essentially agree with almost everything I've heard. So I think we're not really getting to the core issue of where some potential tension might arise. And that is, who gets to define injustice? You see the examples raised, we're all on the same page here by and large, okay? When, African Americans are mistreated, when police brutality takes place, okay? When the Native Indians, and their land was taken away and the pipelines were being built. I mean, who in this entire audience is going to disagree? Of course, we want our ulama and our activists to be at the forefront. But it is a mistake to put LGBT in the same category. It's not the exact same category. Unanimously, we will stand up against racism. Unconditionally, we will stand up against racism. There's no and ifs or buts about it, okay? Police brutality, it's a given. What's happening is dhulm, it's an injustice. We all have to unequivocally educate and tell and hold them accountable. It's understood. But when it comes for an issue, and the reason why LGBT comes in all the time is because there's this clash between activism and theology. Let's forget LGBT. Let's talk about another issue. I'll bring it up in my main session at 5:30. 100 years ago, the 18th Amendment and the 21st Amendment. Okay? Alcohol. Let's talk about alcohol. Simple question. When alcohol was banned in this country in the 18th Amendment, okay? We didn't start it, we didn't end it. The people around us decided alcohol is bad. I ask you, as Allah is your witness, parents in the room, wouldn't you be at some level happy that my kids don't have to be tempted by this now that it's banned? I'll tell you as a parent, I would have been very happy. I would have been happy personally that my kids don't have access to alcohol, okay? Would I have championed, but that's a separate question. Brutally honest question. In those interim periods where you couldn't just walk into your local grocery and purchase alcohol, and theoretically, let's suppose you couldn't get the illegal alcohol as well, right? Because I know you're going to bring the alternative, but suppose there was no alcohol. At some level, wouldn't you be happy that, you know what, at least we're safe from, the fitna of alcohol? Now, the 21st Amendment, alcohol is repealed, alcohol's everywhere. Tell me, honestly, do you think it would be wise if Muslims are championing the 21st Amendment? If Muslims are saying, no, let's go drink. We want people to be able to drink alcohol. It's a freedom that's allowed to us. It's injustice where these people want to drink and they don't have access to drink. You're sending a mixed message when it's alcohol. That's all I'm saying. Be honest about that. Don't equate alcohol with police violence. Don't equate alcohol with racism. The one is crystal clear, the other isn't. And all I'm saying, it's a gray area. Maybe some Muslims would have said, you know what, the government shouldn't dictate your personal cuisine, and you know what, maybe you should have the freedom to drink and whatnot. If I were alive, I think I would have said to them, look, why do you have to even take a side? Why can't you just stay out of this fight? This is not your fight here about alcohol. It's not your religion. It's not your people. It's something that is happening in the broader culture. You jumping to justify it is sending the message you actually support alcohol, for example, right? Do you have to take a clear-cut stance on every single issue? Maybe it's better this fight takes place outside of your circle. And that was my position with the LGBT issue when the Supreme Court was ruling either way. My position was Muslims, maybe it's best we don't get involved. Because we don't want to oppose the constitutional rights here, because in the end of the day, there is an argument to be made. The Constitution should not decide, marriage. But at the same time, should we jump on the bandwagon and proclaim that yes, they should have every right? No, you're sending a mixed message. Because in the end of the day, we do not believe that it is morally healthy to engage in intercourse outside of the bonds of marriage. We believe it will destroy society, not just family, society. So why should I have to champion it? Why can't I just be quiet and preach my version of Islam or whatnot and teach the people? Do I have to become a political activist on each and every issue? That is my point. So I just want to be honest here. Let's not discuss issues we all agree upon. SubhanAllah, masajid with women, everybody, is there anybody in this room that wants women to have second-class citizenship? Nobody. That's a given in this audience. Ourselves on this panel, our masjids are not like that. I know 80% of the masjids are still arguing. But in this audience, it's a given. So don't equate those activisms with the activisms that are theologically problematic. Let's be honest with ourselves and say it's not the same thing. Final point, I know you're going to jump. Final point. Let's not go to extremes.
This is the problem with this panel, is everyone wants to talk. But yes, make your final point.
Mashallah, we're all speakers and activists and leaders. Mushkila. Too many chiefs and not enough Indians. So, final
totally inappropriate. Let me be like, and now I'm going to interrupt you, Sheikh Yasser.
I just said one point.
No, I know, but I want to name that joke was not okay.
Okay.
Just that. But continue.
Okay. The point of jumping to the worst possible scenario, such as the Orlando shooter. Okay, that was dhulm, injustice. A man killed 50 people he shouldn't have killed. Is there a binary system that either I support the massacre or I don't? Isn't there a whole spectrum in between? Can't I have a nuanced discussion? Okay, what that man did is wrong, and he shouldn't have done that. But that doesn't mean I have to endorse a lifestyle. And I still stand by what I said. With all of the talk and all of the passion and all, we need our activists who do not claim to represent Islam, but let's be honest, their appearance, their persona, it invokes Islam in the people they go to. They might not say they represent Islam and Muslims, but their presence is taken as a presence of Islam and Muslims. That is an undeniable fact. Okay? So let those people as well understand their responsibility to preach a theology that is accurate, even if in the political activism they might disagree. We find it difficult for them to do that, and I don't want to put more pressure than that because it is understandably difficult. But be honest enough to acknowledge that difficulty. You cannot practice, you cannot preach, what you yourself believe, generally speaking, because it's going to be very problematic, and that is not a healthy scenario to be in. Allah knows best.
I was going to make 2 points now, I'll make 3. So I just want to, respectfully, Sheikh Yasser, like a couple of us grimaced at the too many chiefs, not enough Indians, and so I had to name it because I know that kind of thing happens there, but also that like sometimes the language we use about different communities is so deeply ingrained in our own language that we don't catch ourselves as we say these things. And so I know it wasn't intentional, but I wanted to share also that we have these debates, and I'm actually glad that we got to see it right here where we did it. But 2 things really quickly. I don't know that alcohol is separate from criminal justice reform or racism, right? Because who enforces the banning of alcohol? The police state. And who is criminalized disproportionately when we talk about the banning of alcohol, the banning of marijuana, the banning of cocaine? Right? The problem with the prison industrial complex in the United States is that we have more people in prison per capita than any other place in the world, and the majority of them are people of color, poor people of color. And so when I think about government enforcement of these things, it's not for me as simple as, oh, we got rid of alcohol. No, those kids still bought alcohol. Sometimes the use of illicit drugs increases when they're not readily available because they become even more seductive. And even if they didn't, the question for me is, would I rather have to deal with teaching a 17-year-old Muslim don't drink alcohol, or the possibility that the Oakland PD is going to target certain communities more than others when it comes to who they think is breaking the law? We see that with drug law enforcement right now. It's why so many of us have been speaking out against the criminalization of drugs. So naming that, I actually don't see them as separate, as Sheikh Yasser says, and I appreciate that because I know that I don't have kids, but I don't want my nieces to have to think about alcohol. I don't want them to have to walk past the alcohol counters. But I do worry that if they made that choice, that the consequences of the police state that we live in are very, very high. A DUI, which could kill someone, so agreed, very, very serious. But even where it doesn't harm someone, could make someone unhoused because you spend $10,000 just paying the police for the one mistake you made. Or you go to jail and then can't get a job when you get out. The thing that I want to say about the LGBT issue is, I feel like we talk about it like it's this one monolithic issue. And so, to the extent that Sheikh Yasser has raised it a number of times, I want to understand what we're talking about, so that we're not talking past each other. Because when I think of the LGBT issue, I think of several questions. Should transgender individuals be able to use a restroom safely? Can we get some gender-neutral restrooms? So people who don't visibly identify as one gender or the other can go in and relieve themselves without having to worry about being killed. Because more transgender people get killed in our country than Muslim women who wear hijab. So I think of it as a safety issue. I think should young high school students who are exploring their sexuality, and yes, we don't want them to go down a certain path and we would counsel them against that, but they're exploring it, should they be discriminated against at school? Should they have to worry about getting beat up? Should they be flunking out, right? Should they be getting kicked out of their parents' homes and being pushed into sex work? Because that's what happens to young children who are exploring their sexuality and don't get comfort and safety at home. They get pushed into sex work, right? So like, let's name that. Should someone not be able to get a job because we disagree with who they love? And we disagree with who they love. So agreeing on that, right? But should they not be able to pay their rent? It keeps coming back to this question of marriage equality, marriage access, the Supreme Court. And I'm with Linda. I don't think it's the government's business who we enter into relationship contracts with. And I would say that that's true for same-sex relationships and for polygamy. So like, this is something that I've said to scholars before. I don't want the US government telling a man he can't marry a man, and I don't want the US government telling a man that he can't marry two women. Because my religion allows that. And here in this state where we live in, it's not the government's business. The government's business is to say you treated everyone equally, everyone is a consenting adult, okay. So when we're talking about LGBT issues, there are lots of ways to talk about them. One of the ways that the question of shirk came up for me was when we invited Glenn Greenwald to speak at a care banquet once. And we were like, he's a leading civil rights activist. To be honest, at the time, I did not know that he's an out gay man.
He's a reporter, by the way.
He's a reporter at The Intercept. He's who broke the major NSA story years ago, right? That the NSA was spying on not just Muslim leaders, but all of us. And a Muslim said to me, you can't have him on your stage. He's openly gay. And I was like, well, that's not what we're inviting him to talk about. And we're not actually endorsing anything about any of that. We're asking him to talk about surveillance. And they said, no, we really need you to check with the scholars. So we checked with the scholars. And I was fortunate to have scholars who said to me, well, what's a bigger sin than that? It's shirk. How many Christians have you had on your stage? You're not asking them to come talk about Jesus as the Son of God. You're asking them to talk about what you agree on. And so when we say LGBT, I want to push us to not just think of it as a monolithic issue in the same way that if someone says Muslim, it's not just about hijab and beards. It's about prayer. It's about the Muslim ban. It's about surveillance. It's about polygamy. It's about a lot of different things. And so when we say LGBT, we can endorse their right to engage, to live free and safe without fear of being killed. Because that's what's at stake. Fear of being killed because they get killed more than we do in the United States. Right? We talk a lot about our safety. They get killed more than we do. It's not about marriage. It's about safety and freedom and just the ability to live without looking over their shoulders.
I just want to put on real quick.
I'm going to talk to another panel. Can I just say one last thing before I leave?
Sure.
And just to be clear, because I have to go to another panel right now for a minute, but this discussion is exactly the thing that I brought up originally, the assumptions that are made. This is with all my love to our dear Sheikh on this panel, Sheikh Yasser Qadi. You would think that by listening to this, you would think there was some sort of Muslim coalition for same-sex marriage, and that we were all out there lobbying our elected officials, that we were like headlining, conferences and engagements around the country. And that, just to be clear for folks that are not clear in the audience, that actually is not the fact. And in fact, many of our LGBTQ allies and dear friends of mine, and best friends of mine, don't invite me to do things like that because they themselves know the positions of the communities that we come from when it comes to that particular issue.
So we want to make it clear here that, to Zahra's point, that when you say, for example, police brutality, guess what? Also queer people of color are getting beat at the hands of police. Trans people of color are being killed at the hands of police. So when you say police brutality, that also means them. When you talk about racism, when you talk about access to healthcare, we're talking about also LGBTQ issues. It's kind of like Muslims, and I say this to Muslims all the time. There is no Muslim issue. Every issue is a Muslim issue. Healthcare is a Muslim issue. Women's rights, education reform, all the issues you hear about every day, environmental justice. These are all Muslim issues. So there's no one category that's LGBTQ, because those folks who consider themselves to be part of the LGBTQ community also suffer from poverty, from racism, from sexism, from all kinds of things that you yourself also are impacted by. So what I want to say, just to kind of close this out and for the resolution, this is